my calendar here too. So let me kick things off here. Let's roll. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are glad you are here with us, and just by showing up today, you're already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I'm pleased to feature two guys, one of whom I've known, admired, and respected for many, many years, and the other of whom I've just met, but he is equally amazing, and I bet you agree with me following this episode. I promise you will leave today thinking, wow, who knew? And you'll also leave smarter and more inspired than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the business. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. And in this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and please make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the session. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address speakers and attendees, not just the speakers. I want to thank our sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this series free. Special thanks to First Horizon Bank, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, MedJet, Tennessee Brew Works, Project Music, and Cushmaster's brand of CBD products. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome Chris Moon. Over the last 25 years, Chris has worked to foster a creative approach to supporting artists in a variety of capacities. As an artist manager, he's worked with critically acclaimed artists such as Josh Rouse, Landon Pig, and Rosie Thomas. He currently manages Merge Records artist Apex Manor. He also works for Ambient Inc., a leading merch management company, as their artist relations manager. Ambient clients include Bon Iver, Courtney Barnett, Sylvan Esso, John Legend, Camp, and Thundercat, to name a few. In 2019, Chris created a podcast called Tough Love, Adventures in Artist Management, where he interviews fellow artist managers, uncovering real-world stories and insights. Past guests have included Jordan Curlin, who manages Death Cab for Cutie, Josh Sundquist with Bon Iver, Michelle Fleshy and with Tenacious D, among others. Chris has spoken at several industry conferences over the years, including South by Southwest, Americana Fest. He's been quoted in Billboard magazine, Polestar, NPR, and the LA Times. Welcome, Chris. So glad to have you, brother. And joining Chris as today's featured guest is one of my friends and heroes in the local music industry, Jason Moon Wilkins. Jason's been banging his head against the brick wall of preconceived Nashville notions for almost 3 decades. It began shortly after moving here to attend Belmont University, where he immediately asked the school to add an additional showcase to their schedule to highlight the musical misfits who would have otherwise fallen through the cracks. And in some form or fashion, he's been making the same case ever since. In the 1990s, that meant going from overnight DJ at WRLT to assignment editor for Bone magazine to music director for Thunder 94. There was also a short-lived record deal for his band called Toy Bean, and touring and recording with Josh Rouse, Garrison Starr, and Nielsen Hubbard. He moved into artist management with none other than Chris Moon and Kip Crones in the early 2000s, and served as music editor for the Tennesseans Entertainment Weekly. In 2006, Jason developed Next Big Nashville, which evolved into a multi-day music festival and conference, giving early spotlights to some of the South's biggest success stories, from Cage the Elephant to Alabama Shakes. Along the way, he also co-founded Do 615, helped curate Red Bull Sound Select, worked at 30 Tigers, and contributed to American Songwriter, Nashville Scene, and the NME. In 2016, he made the leap to public radio, joining WPLN as host and reporter, with stories airing nationally on programs like All Things Considered and Here and Now. In late 2020, he was named program director of Nashville Public Radio's music discovery station, WNXP. He's also been involved in numerous boards and community groups, including the Nashville Mayor's Council, Music Council, Leadership Music, Nashville Music Awards, NARAS, Nashville Film Fest, Tin Pan South, and Summer Lights. It is such a pleasure to welcome these two rock stars to the program. Please take it away, Chris.
Sure, thanks, Tom. Oh, to start off with, Jason, I got to ask you, how's your head?
How's my head?
Yeah, after banging it against the wall there in Nashville for so long.
You know, after
or more
you do it for
importantly,
so
how's
long.
the wall?
Yeah, the wall shows dents, but my head is, after a while you develop calluses, Chris, you know
Yeah,
this.
there you go. Yeah. Awesome. Well, gosh, we've known each other. I was thinking about this the other day. It's coming up on or right at 30 years, which is nuts.
Yeah, next year. Yeah.
Yeah. So we met kind of in a funny, bizarre way. We were both at Belmont University and in Pembroke Hall, and they used to put your names on the doors outside, and we share the name Moon, and that's kind of how we first bumped into each other. As I recall.
I vividly remember, Belmont back then, you probably even more conservative than today. So when I heard this really loud family cussing walking up the hallway behind me, I was like, who are these people? And I looked on the door and saw the Moon name, and I went, oh, I wonder if we're related to them. And sure enough, it was you and your family. It was awesome. I'm like, all right, A, we might be related. B, I'm going to get along with these people. So, and we did.
Yeah.
We did lots of crazy stuff in between then and now, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, and then things kind of really settled in, I think, right before you went abroad for a semester. You had this idea of putting together, back in the early mid 90s, there were a series of compilation CDs, playlist, if you will, in today's terminology, but in a physical format. And you were working on putting together a list of like South to Eastern bands, and trying to raise some capital for that. And I should have dug it out and found it, but I still have the sheet of paper where you wrote down a bunch of contacts and band names and basically handed it to me at the end of this benefit show and said, hey, if you want to try to raise some money while I'm gone, that'd be great. And I for whatever reason, I was like, oh, this is a mission. And by the time you came back, we had about $1,000 in the bank, and we're able to kind of get that going. And just incredibly, I was really thinking a lot about, that was just the beginning kind of us doing stuff together beyond our friendship. But the other just like impacts you've had on so many people in Nashville in a lot of ways, but certainly on myself was like when we ended up through that compilation bumping into, or I guess you met Josh Rouse at a Grantley Buffalo show, and then eventually you started playing with Josh, and through that relationship I started managing Josh, and that kind of really opened up my whole career trajectory. So there's just so many, that's kind of glossing over some of the things that we did even at Belmont back in the day, but there's just so many touch points. Looking back through everything that you've really planted seeds and pushed forth in a way that I'm eternally grateful for, and I know a lot of other people are too. If I really were to think about you holistically, you're an artist first and foremost. You're incredibly creative in your approach and everything you do. You're a curator. There's really nobody else that I know has as good a taste as you do. You're obviously an entrepreneurial spirit and just love creating things as that kind of comes out of that. And you're an advocate for the arts, whatever that may be. It's really great to see and have an opportunity to talk about all those touch points with you today on various things that we've had the opportunity to do together, but the stuff that you've gone on and branched out on and built on. The way you've kind of encapsulated all that as a DJ, as a musician, as a journalist, as a promoter, and we managed artists together. So just like so many different combinations of that, but it really kind of started I would think, as far as like a bookend goes, with what you're doing now with NXP and what you started out at as college radio back in the day, even prior to Nashville, is kind
Yeah.
of the connecting point that brings it full circle. So do you want to kind of just talk a little bit about your early days in radio
Yeah,
and kind of start
sure.
there?
Well, and first of all, thank you, Chris, for saying that. Because for those who don't know, this conversation could and probably should be easily flipped for me interviewing Chris, but he's, through incredible creativity and tenacity, made a life for himself in music, even when the odds have sometimes stacked, against him and the industry in general. We've all fought through the survivor's game. But one thing I wanted to point out about that compilation CD, so it was called Soundtrack to the Bible Belt. And yeah, at that time, compilation CDs were sometimes an introduction piece for people. But part of it, if you remember, the impetus for doing it also was, all due respect to Belmont back in the day, it wasn't really teaching us some of the things we wanted to know. And we looked at that project also as essentially a way to we learned about manufacturing, we learned about distribution, we learned about, getting the artwork together. And to your point, like all the different ways you had to connect the licensing hurdles, all that kind of stuff. I'm still not sure some of those things were properly licensed, but, and then we put on a show to support that. So we, through that project, I think about that a lot. And when I've spoken to students before, I'm like, well, that was a self-directed piece that, we got our hands dirty on all of that. There is more sort of experiential learning in general now. I know that that's a big thing in education, and I really, I push for that. I think it's valuable, but I also think that it's, people like Jay Joyce, who's now one of the biggest producers in, country music. His old band was on there, Lamb Chop, who were still one of the best indie bands, going to be up in your neck of the woods this week.
Seeing them tomorrow night.
We're on there, and folks, to your point about the college radio, was still connected to the Elephant Six group. And so we had Olivia Tremor Control, and it was this great opportunity to sort of meld all those things together. And in a way, that's kind of what, at least in my life, I've kept doing in different formats. It has been, what are some things that might be overlooked? How do I shine a spotlight on them? Whether it's through events or radio or whatever. And you're right, some of that goes back to my real first kind of job that wasn't paid in the music business was the college radio station in Ruston, Louisiana, called KLPI. And it was so serendipitous. It was Freaks and Geeks college version, because this school in Louisiana Tech, it was where if you couldn't, afford to or get into some of these big art schools, it was where a lot of the artistic people from that part of the world went. And and you had nothing to do. Like there is zero to do in Ruston, Louisiana. Yeah, I see Mike throwing up the horns. That is where I met Mike Dickinson, who's watching this right now. But really, like, it was organized in, college radio at that time. When you look back, so many people in the music business, they got their start there because you did have those touchstones from all the way through. You learned about promotion, you learned about, how all of the label side worked and everything else. And you just listened to a ton of music. But at that time, in that place, it was also, I had no idea that we were surrounded by what would become, Apples and Stereo, Neutral Milk Hotel, a generational band, and Olivia Tremor Control and all that. That started there before it migrated to Athens, Georgia. And that was also this really DIY spirit. It was, to Tom's point earlier, you make something because you're inspired to make it, and you're going to do it even if, in the case of, Neutral Milk Hotel playing a laundromat, on a Sunday afternoon. And that was a really inspiring piece too, to not only see the success of what they were able to do moving forward, but just how they did it. It was highly collaborative, and it was driven by this artistic spirit that just, in this case, expressed itself through music,
Yeah, and it kind of lit a fire, going back to our time at Belmont. I remember they had, I guess it was 3 or 4 showcases as part of, the music business program. Yes. And you identified that there's a lot that was underserved for that, and
Yeah.
started what ultimately was called the Other Showcase. I think it's morphed into the Alternative Showcase, but Alternative was a format
Yeah.
of music at the time, so it didn't really totally encapsulate that. But I look back and think about the audacity to like work within that system and get that up and running.
Oh, I did that
in
my
a
first
time.
semester.
Did you? Was your
Well,
first semester?
Yeah, no,
man.
I think about it now and I go, what in the hell? And why were people listening to me? Like, I really do. Like, who is this punk ass kid? And I don't mean that in this sort of like, to self-congratulatory way. Like, I mean, we change over time as people, right? Physiologically, psychologically. And I know I'm a different person now than I was then. And so I look at that person and I go, man, what was he up to? Because the way that unfolded, I don't even if you remember this part, and I have a very clear memory of this, sitting down with Bob Malloy, who ran the music business program. For those who don't know, legendary name, but he started in gospel sheet music. So here was a guy who made his living in gospel sheet music that I was sitting down and going, okay, here's all this stuff that you're missing. I know I'm new here. I know I've been here less than 2 months, but you're missing, this whole thing. Look at this. But, and I came in with all this essentially data in a way, like you have entire programs over here on MTV dedicated to alternative music, but you're also not doing jazz and you're not doing this, and I remember he was amused with me, but he also was like, hey, sounds good. Why don't you do it? He had, of course, one rule, and you remember that we broke this rule: no cussing. I think our first band of the night gets up and says shit, and I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So I had to like go to the principal's office afterwards, but he let us keep doing it, and they kept doing it at Belmont for 20 years, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know why he said yes.
Yeah, but it definitely served a purpose. And sometimes you just start those things and you don't know. Likewise, I remember a few years after that, while we were still at school, I mean, there was only so many opportunities to not intern within the country music or Christian music industry, which wasn't really our forte. But I ended up going out to LA for a summer and interning at Giant Records. So Rory Daigle and I just kind of like decided to go for it, and we did it. And the school kind of supported, but didn't really know what to do. And then flash forward like 2 or 3 years later, they started Belmont West, Belmont East. It's kind of it's ironic how in some ways you do things to fill the gap of what you want out of something, and then it kind of springs forward, and it's kind of fun to see the reverberations that happen in those ways. It's not like you or I have any deep-seated kind of desire to take credit for that per se, as much as just know that it kicked open a door that other people could take advantage of. And that's another
in musical terms too. It is funny. It is like the inevitably like the band that like the Pixies, for example. The Pixies created the template. Nirvana maximized that template and commercialized that template. Quiet Loud, all that. And you were definitely the Pixies in that situation. You went out, you did it because you wanted to do it, and it was smart, and you learned a lot. And they went, oh, okay, this can be done. Because I think it does, speak to hopefully, instigating bravery. It's so easy to just go, well, I'm gonna let somebody else figure this out. And sometimes it's not terribly financially rewarding to be the first one, in it, but it definitely is rewarding in other ways. I didn't need my name on the Other Showcase, but it was fun. I remember getting approached years later. Someone was like, hey, would you come be a judge for this thing? I'm like, did you know I started it? And they're like, no, I had no, there's no plaque anywhere that says that. But that was cool. It was cool to see it continue to go, and I mean, sure, look, I'll take the money, don't get me wrong. But there is, that's not, as you reflect on what you've done, the money part isn't the big deal.
I mean, so many of the things I think you and I have done in our careers have been driven more out of a need to fill that gap that we were, the hole that we saw, and also just to have fun with it and learn. I mean, and I'm glad, there's a lot of things we could say about our time in education at Belmont, but I would say the thing that I love the most is it was just such a great Well, first of all, first and foremost, obviously, just a great group of people to be around that are
Yeah.
still doing some pretty amazing things. But outside of that, it was just a great springboard to try things and learn as you went along. And I think both of us, but you more so even than I, you ended up like having a job like before you even finished school.
Yeah, I mean,
know,
yeah, for anyone who's wondering, I do not have a degree. I'm still, I haven't met him yet. I'm sure there's somebody else in the NPR world that doesn't have a degree, but I'm the only one that I've met. I mean, I went to school for a while, but yeah, to your point, and I remember that meeting too. I went to Bob Malloy and said, "Hey, I've been offered this job, and you know, and what do you think?" And he said, "We're not going anywhere." And it was one of the rare, at the time in the 90s, it was rare to have a job that wasn't in country or Christian music available to you if you wanted to stay in Nashville. So
yeah,
many of us who wanted to work in that world thought New York or LA was our only bet. And I did for a long time think that that's okay, I'm going to end up in New York, but yeah, that moment of taking that job, it was scary, because school is such a big thing, but it was also, like you said before, it was a leap. It was an opportunity to get in there, and I saw it as a path to, further what I was doing. And that job at the time, Tuned In Broadcasting, the parent company for WRLT, which is still on the air today, back then also had a magazine called Bone Magazine. And not to bore everybody with the details of that, but it had an outsized impact for this little thing that was done in the LNC Tower down in Nashville, where we essentially created what now you would say content. We created the magazine, and all these huge radio stations that were just massive in the 90s, WMMS in Cleveland and down to Houston, like, 99X in Atlanta. They would put their own little brand on the cover, and they would put some calendar listings in the middle. And that's how it worked. It was, but because of that, we distributed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of copies. And because of that, as a really young person, I was able to, I'm taking calls from big time managers, big time publicists, all that. I'm in the flow of meeting a lot of people who, some of whom I'm still very much in touch with, in a way that if I would worked even at the local paper, I would not have been on that same level. I would have been talking to the tour publicist or something, and I'm talking to these people now. I mean, I got to meet Danny Clinch and all these people before he was Danny Clinch, all that kind of stuff through that opportunity, so yeah, I still have to apologize to my mom, about not getting a degree, but
yeah, I got the degree and I've never used it. So I think you came out ahead. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we were so fortunate to be able to just do so many just crazy things that I don't know. It's like I look back on that now, and I try to, as a parent, as we both are, just try to distill that in some respects into my kids of like, yeah, reach out, try to do things, try to be bullish with your passions, and and quite often, you fail at it. I mean, I remember, I'll tell a story of one of my early failures as a promoter, and how you bailed me out of it. I had an artist, Mark Eitzel, who I always wanted to see play live, that we're both big fans of. And I bumped into him at CMJ up in New York, conference there, and his agent, and I reached out, booked a show. He got into town the night before the show, and the venue had closed. Of course, I didn't know the venue closed. I didn't know anything about this, but I got ripped one the following morning from his agent, and I didn't know what to do. So I called Jason up, and he was kind enough to talk me down and say, "Well, here's what you need to do," because you'd interviewed him at one point.
Yeah.
You're like, go buy a nice bottle of red wine and meet him down at sound check. And we found this church for him to play in.
Yeah.
That night, so we were still able to do the show. The other real big thing is I booked the artist I was managing at the time, Josh Rouse, to open as a full band when Mark was playing solo, which was another big no-no. But Mark was a total sweetheart, and we got through the night, and he was happy. And he took, even though he took a reduction, I still don't have enough money to pay him at the end of the night. Do you remember us driving around to hit ATMs,
Yeah.
trying to take money out of your account so we can go back and pay Mark?
Oh, I remember
It's
that
like,
part. Yeah, because there was
oh,
max
man.
that you could take out, so we had to like hit different ATMs.
Yeah, it was like, oh my gosh. But you know, I mean, those are the things that you just, the dumb things you do that you learn from and create really nice memories and stories. And hopefully, you know, it gets better over time. But yeah, I don't know if I would have had, you know, the guts to do that kind of thing if it wasn't for some of the stuff we did at school, you know, and with that compilation and whatnot.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, kind of, you know, just failing and falling forward and, you know, figuring it out was part of the fun, you know. And I feel like that's kind of a common theme through both of our careers.
Yeah.
But you know, the other thing that goes along with that is just the like mental health challenges and just like adult stuff that you have to deal with. You know, having you know, like we said, like having families and spouses and responsibilities and trying to kind of find a balance in this industry that really there is no, you know, at least when we stepped into this, it was like labels were flush, the industry was going full tilt, and you know, you could look at it and see a path. And I think somewhere around the early 2000s, so maybe over the last 10 years or so, it's like it's completely fractured, in my opinion. Like, you know, you stay in one career for 2 or 3 years and then within the industry, and then you branch off and try something else, and it's almost expected or a necessity. So when one thing starts, no matter how much success you have within it, you know, if it stops, reinventing yourself is incredibly challenging. And that's one thing I've always admired about, you know, both of our careers, but certainly yours, is because you've been able to like see opportunity on the backside of that and continue to kind of evolve and reimagine that trajectory for yourself, which is no easy feat.
Well, honestly, it was, you know, look, there's no secret to any of it. I've had a lot of what would be seen as and are, you know, failures, financial failures, creative failures. And sometimes my move from one segment of the industry to the other was not by choice, you know, but at the same time, over time, especially when the music industry really hit, you know, its most recent bottom and everyone was getting fired and all the rest of it, I did realize that, okay, I had gained a superpower over time, which was flexibility and you know, from a mental health standpoint, like this recognition that A, the job isn't everything, you know, and the B, you know, you do have to navigate rejection, and that was the hardest, and still continues to be a hard part. You know, there's like there's no doubt that the mental health aspect, and I've, you know, in full transparency, like so many people, I think we've all gotten better at talking about this, but our generation was really expected to work. I mean, how many 2:30 a.m. emails we both sent, you know, or texts, and essentially burn yourself out, you know. And so many people had, but and so many friends we lost along the way, you know, because people get confused about the addiction thing or about substances, and it's, you know, look, they're just looking for something to numb the pain, you know, that so many of us go through. And I hit that wall, you know, I hit it a few times. I hit it really hard while I was working at 30 Tigers, you know, and all due respect for them to, you know, bringing me in, but the timing was rough. I had gone through a bunch of rejection after rejection after rejection, and even some things that felt like success on one level, you know, I knew that financially in the back end weren't great. And that was what led me to public radio, actually. It was, you know, I just looked up and I went, okay, I need a change, you know, and this opportunity came up, and we can get into the details of how that happened. But part of that decision was truly a mental health decision. You know, I mean, I chose to go to news in 2016, which is another conversation entirely, but yeah, you know, I needed to step away. I needed to step back from it because it is a really, really challenging industry that it basically says, wake up every day, be super creative, And a whole lot of people are just going to slam the door in your face over and over and over again. But that's okay. Do it again. That's a hard, that's
go to
not,
lunch and then go do it
yeah.
again.
Well, and it took me a long time because of having, coming from a family that, had work type jobs. I'm like, what am I complaining about? But then I thought it's taken a while for our generation, even from a reflection standpoint, to look back and go, well, there is a difference. Yeah, that is physically more demanding, but there's also an end to that day. You clock out, you go home, and you wake up the next day, and you're not thinking about it over the weekend, and someone's not calling you in the middle of the night. And with our job, it is your life, and no job should be your life.
Yeah.
Period. Don't let anybody, if there's anything I could share with anybody that means anything, don't let anyone tell you that. Because maybe for a very small few fraction of people, they can say, I wake up every day and I enjoy, that's honestly bullshit for most people. And we're seeing that in the numbers of people, when it comes to mental health, the people who are quiet quitting, the people who are part of the Great Resignation. You do have to have that balance. And it starts with creating boundaries, with social media, paying attention to your mental health, all that, and staying connected with people. I sacrificed friendships at times, for the job, because I thought that's what I should do or supposed to do for family. And yeah, that's not great. I don't look up and think, one of my closest friends just died, and I hadn't seen him in almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And that was, look, we're both, it happens to everybody. But it's just one other wake-up call to go, okay, yeah, job is your job, your life is your life, and hopefully you do something that's inspiring. And I do get to do amazing things, and it is inspiring, but it's still a job,
Yeah.
And your life outside of that needs to also be inspiring beyond your job.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, you found that earlier on in some respects, though. It took me a while. I'm internally grateful to my wife, Amanda, for pulling me out of that. I was a complete workaholic. In my early part of my career, I was not successful enough to lean in 100% into the job. I had to have a part-time real job.
Yeah.
By part-time, 40 hours a week. So you're working 80, 90, 100 hours a week.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's easy to get burnt out really quickly. It kept me going, but man, the rate I was on was not healthy. And to be able to make that shift and see light outside of work, it's hard when work is what you love and you're good at it, and it's fun, even with all the the challenges that go along with it. It's it still is a driver, but it can't be the sole driver for sure.
There was a recent thing. It was a study about. I think it was primarily heart disease, but it was the comorbidity for a bunch of different things, and a longitudinal study over time. And one of the things I found really interesting about it was if you excused for activity and diet and all the rest of it, one of the things that led to healthier long-term outcomes was the number of communities you were a part of. And they needed to be different things, right? So that might be a faith community, it might be you're really into knitting or whatever, but how crucial that was for interaction. And to your point, I think that is the problem sometimes within music. It's like, well, you're working a day, then you're going to go to a show at night, and then over the weekend you might go to a festival. It's like it still is kind of all one thing,
Right.
And even though it's a really cool and fun thing, you do need these other parts. You need interests, and you need community outside of that. And as you well know, I found it in a weird way, coaching youth sports, that's been a huge thing for me, extremely rewarding, totally different. And yet it's come back in this current job, leading this new radio station, WNXP, I've used a lot of coaching things, I have a team and I have to motivate them and I have to manage expectations and emotions and, interpersonal stuff. And, it's very similar to working with a coaching staff and a team, no matter what age they are.
Exactly.
It's what's the scalable lessons from youth coaching. There you go. That's my coffee table book. We're write
transferable. Yeah. No, I love that. And that's very true. And, talking about communities outside of the industry, The other thing I think both of us have been fortunate enough to have along the way is just really great, a great peer group, great mentors, that we can kind of lean on a little bit and get to know, and, kind of see a path that they've taken maybe, and tap into that from time to time. And I would say, yeah, those outside communities are incredibly important to find the balance. But the thing that really keeps you going within, or at least for me within the industry, is just having those other communities and like-minded people that you can, commiserate with and check in with and bump into. And it's like that's one byproduct of the industry starting out when it was, at its height, late 90s for us. And then kind of like where it's at now, it's shifted and changed quite a bit. But the people that are by and large around now or coming into it are doing it for more of what I would say are the right reasons. Just, have a passion point for it, or good people. And, that's certainly helpful, and kind of touching into those communities.
Well, and, I want to say to the, so when I joined Nashville Public Radio, moved into the NPR world, completely not music, outside of a few different music stories that I did. It was a different set of challenges. It was very rewarding in its own way. And when this opportunity to start this station, a music station, was offered, it wasn't automatic for me. I was involved with strategic planning and thinking of, through this and the research. But when it came to answering that question, I really did have to think through it and think, did I want to throw myself back into the music world and some of those challenges? In exactly what you were saying was a real tipping point for me. Was I'd gotten to know some of the program directors and other people within public radio, and they were, even though very different types of people, I saw the same kind of mission reflected in them, and this willingness too that was very different from previous experience in the music business. This willingness to share and uplift, and that sounds very kumbaya, but it's true. It's not, look, normally Elektra is not calling Warner and going, hey, how did you market that last record? What worked for you?
Right.
That's a click right on the other end. But I can call up and have KEXP or Radio Milwaukee or KUTX or The Current or whoever and say, and we're working on this thing, what has worked for you? And everyone shares that they truly want to see these different, because they know that it's more than just a radio station. These are community platforms when it does well, and when it grows to what it can be. And that is very much to your point, the sustainable piece to this, that keeps you going, and knowing that there's a whole lot of people that have your back outside of even just your own crew in your own city. Yeah.
That's kind of the, I guess, the hard to define, kind of element that so many of our peers have. And you certainly have it. I hope I have it at times. It's just that kind of like, I don't know, that vibe of just like, oh, you just want to see this person win. You want to see them succeed in some respects, through whatever, path they take. I distinctly remember when you reached out to me and said, hey, I think I'm going to interview for this NPR job. And I can't remember what I said exactly, but at least in my head, I was just like, oh my God, this is like the perfect thing. This is exactly what you need now. Take that break, that mental break, go and do what, kind of combines two of your passions, the journalism component, which you hadn't done in that kind of manner necessarily, but we're obviously capable of doing. And, your history in radio, and the fact that it was outside of the music industry didn't matter, just like, it just, kind of was a perfect intersection of like your talents and opportunity. And the fact that, you went and excelled at that, and it's kind of spun into, where you're at now, back in the music industry, is just, I don't know, to me as a fan, I'm just like, oh, that's so great, so good to have that come full circle and just kind of continue to build and ebb and grow in a good way. I imagine that's hard to see necessarily on the inside.
I mean, like everything,
it's great to see on the outside,
and thank you for that. But yeah, of course, I mean, the everyday process is, call with a sponsor this morning, setting up the, show that I have to do for tomorrow. Like Brad, the
Right.
amazing amount of time it takes to find and download music now. Because of I mean, seriously, this is the weirdly challenging piece to like running a music station as opposed to a streaming service right now, is that everyone's delivery method seems to be slightly different.
Yeah.
In the 90s, people just sent you CDs, in the early 2000s might be a mix of both, but now it's like they might use this delivery service or this. So running a new music show on a Friday, it's an amazing amount of time tracking songs down, but it's really inspiring. Another part of saying yes to this was, I do think we're at a really inspiring and interesting time right now musically, because we have all these artists coming of age who they grew up in a somewhat genreless, upbringing.
Yeah.
They had the world at their fingertips through YouTube and then eventually through DSPs. Whereas we very much had, sort of genre identities in a way. I'm the punk kid, or I'm the indie kid, or I'm the hip hop kid, or whatever. And it led to sometimes you not listening to things, that really you would have ended up loving, and that you not so self-identify with this group. So I forgive us all for that, for some of our CD collections not being as interesting as they should be. But now with that, so you see these kids who, man, they'll cross over identities and concepts in a song,
Right.
all of a sudden there's a break that sounds like emo for 30 seconds. And then it's back into this indie thing. And then it's a hip hop beat. And I just find it so inspiring and amazing, and to be back in a part of hopefully helping those artists grow and find an audience. I do think it's similar in a lot of ways to the 90s time before alternative kind of got commodified by the end of the 90s, and like Limp Bizkit came on. If you're a Limp Bizkit fan, I'm sorry. But
you don't have to apologize.
When it was a varied, alternative was a pretty big umbrella, but it was created for all these different things. And I think we're in a similar time, I really do, as far as this whole wave of not just younger, but just artists in general who are piecing together fascinating styles that, the difficulty is from a marketing standpoint. What do you play? I'm like, we'll get asked that all the time. What do you play? I'm like, everything.
Yeah.
But I think it's a long road kind of plan. If you do that, then you have a wider tent in general. But it's certainly launching, especially launching during lockdown, presented challenges. What's the one sentence description of your musical focus?
Yeah, that's always been a challenge for anything that I've done. Like, how do you describe A, what you do, and B, what it kind of is like the elevator pitch component? It's like,
right.
It's, and sometimes that can be frustrating for, whoever you're talking to, and certainly for yourself, but it can also be a plus. It's like, oh my gosh, it's so diversified and so different that it's hard to put in words at times. You're talking about communities, or we're discussing communities in general, but thinking of like the great AAA non-com stations and how they developed in their own communities and what they mean to them. The other thing that's really exciting, that's different than the 90s, but certainly more open in a way, is just like the various, I'm just thinking of like all the great UK acts you guys play that are coming up right now. And if I think about some of my favorite artists over the last 5 years or so many of those are from Australia. And, 20 years ago, I don't know if any of those would have necessarily made their way over here in the capacity that they do now. And I think that's one advantage to like things flattening out in a streaming era, is people have access to listen to more, but they're finding them through outlets that are more traditional, like radio. Like I think of a band like Yard Act as like, as soon as I hear that song once, I'm like, ooh, this is intriguing. But to be able to dial that up immediately and digest it on my own and become a fan enough to go to a show is, it's a different. It's not the same as, running the Tower Records at 11 o'clock at night and reading Mojo for an hour and getting kicked out. But it's kind of great to be able to, access stuff at will. There's some opportunity to spread out of that, but we still need somebody to point you in the right direction. So,
Well, and I do believe that we can, we've seen stations like, KUTX, for example, down in Austin, hit all-time ratings and have all-time numbers of all this stuff, actually sort of, and have gotten to be friends with them, and they do great work. And it has been through diversifying playlists, focusing on communities, being local, but they play all kinds of stuff. And I think there is a craving for that connection to community, and those kind of stations, our kind of stations, can hopefully help provide that. But also, I do think, these pendulums swing, and we've seen it, the upside of being around for a while is we were there for the .com craziness in 2000 when they were handing out Stephen Keen paintings at CMJ. We were there when it, the Great Recession, when it looked like everybody in the world was going to lose their job. We're there when the streaming started, all that, and we've seen these things flip back and forth. And I do think that this is in no way to say radio is going to have this huge revival, but I do think that public radio stations and these kinds of platforms do have an opportunity within a space where people are. There was a great article in Esquire actually this month about this. It's a lot of work to manage, your musical life at this point. You still want and need help for that. We have this very diverse group of people who are finding music all the time. That's our job, and then telling stories about it and bringing it to people who are busy, and who have to bring their kids to soccer practice and work and do whatever, and who aren't sitting there listening to about 1,000 songs and finding the 3 or 4 they like, and finding things that the algorithm is not going to find for them.
Right.
So, bringing in diverse voices within the staff and being very intentional about all that, that helps create that opportunity for people. And so far, that's what, we just went through membership drive. So I apologize if I sound all mission focused, but that's what we hear back from people, that's the value. Some people saying, we've heard this a bunch. Oh, well, David Mead, who I hadn't seen in forever, tour managed back in the day, ran into him and he said, "Man, I love your station. I want you to know that I'd kind of given up, on pop music. I hadn't really listened to certain things in a while. And then I flip on to you guys and I'm Shazamming things all the time." So that's a common, story and feedback that we get. And I think that's where we really can still bring value.
Yeah, absolutely. That human touch, if you will, to that it feels like, I could be wrong, but I really hope that is a trend that continues, in a lot of ways. There's so many things about the music industry that has gotten kind of cold and transactional, in a way.
Right.
And
mathematical.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, I'm where I've landed now doing merchandise, it's been fun working with artists and working with managers and just seeing, standing behind a merch booth and seeing fans come up and want to engage and spend money on something that's tangible,
Yeah.
There's really nothing more flattering, in my opinion, for an artist than to see somebody wear their t-shirt, with their name on it. You got to be a fan to do that. And I'm hoping there's more opportunity for things like that to kind of come around. And what you guys do kind of bridge that space a little bit. And in my opinion, you kind of create those fans and get them out to shows and get them more involved and engaged with specific artists. And that's so needed, and really kind of missing, quite often.
Yeah. I was looking to see if anybody had thrown a question out in there. I didn't want to ignore that at all. Y'all please do, because I know we're getting close on time here. But one thing I would throw out too, just as a if we're in look back mode, I don't want to overlook how valuable it has been to everything that I've done to have been a musician,
Yes.
And to be able to see from that standpoint and to understand that. There was a John Madden quote one time when they asked him, this was years after being a broadcaster and pitchman and all that, video game czar. What did he see himself as? And he's like, well, I'm a coach, now I'm doing all these other things, but I'm a coach, and even though I am not picking up the bass every day or writing songs all the time, it's a big part of me a musician, and that goes into the way we think about programming, the way we think about and throughout all the different things that I've done, we were just talking today with a company about doing a series of events that would primarily be focused on a social aspect. I said, okay, well, cool. But if we do music, let's be very cognizant of that. I have been that person on that stage, or I've been the manager of the person on that stage when everyone's talking, no one's listening, and that sucks for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but, and I don't mean to use just a negative example, positive examples of arriving at a radio station or a festival or wherever, and people have thought about what it means to be on the road. They have some extra water for you. Maybe they're throwing you some socks. There are these things that that kind of lived experience has been able to help me all along the way, inform, not just what I'm doing, but how I'm doing it.
Yeah, especially in the realm of artist management, I think it's so important. You never want to ask your artist to do something that you want to do, at the end of the day. And there's plenty of opportunities in this industry to put people, in those positions. And that is, you gotta lean into those relationships first and foremost, even if they're not personal and only professional, and not ask too much of anyone. And it's hard not to have that perspective if you haven't been, on the other side of it. So that kind of thing makes a big difference for sure.
Well, as we get close on time, what have we not covered that we should?
Yeah, you guys have any questions?
I got a couple for you.
Yeah,
sure.
I want to know some little slice of life things. What was the very first concert you guys ever went to that you remember going to?
Oh man. First non-Christian concert, because my family is very religious, so it was a lot of Amy Grant, stuff like that. All due respect, Amy Grant was very good live. I remember seeing LA Guns open up for Cheap Trick in Ruston, Louisiana. And
how old were you? About
15, I think, 14, 15. Yeah, they weren't real big on me getting to go to some of these things, but I don't even know how I talked them into it, but it was great. It was one of the loudest things I'd ever seen. I was like,
Chris, what about you?
That's awesome. My sisters and I pitched in and bought my dad tickets to go see ZZ Top for Father's Day. And I was 13 and I got to go, and I was hooked immediately. So, and then fun fact, almost 20 years later, I took him to go see ZZ Top again, right around Father's Day, which was a lot of fun. So my dad, neither of my parents were very musical, but my dad loved music. And when MTV started, we just watched MTV constantly every night. And, that was just such a joy to kind of know that music could be there. I mean, I think that had a profound impact on my interest in music, definitely in a different era, but it was a lot of fun. But I was hooked on concerts after that. There's nothing better still to this day.
What was the first record you ever purchased with your own money?
I remember for show and tell, you'll get a kick out of this, Tom. In 4th grade, I found at a flea market "The Dude" by Quincy Jones. It was a 45, and it's a song basically where he's just like the dude, and it's just great, Quincy with the strings, everything like that. I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was cool that it said "The Dude." And when they asked for show and tell, I went up and just put it on the little school turntable, and it got into some suggestive lyrics that the teacher wasn't totally down with. So needle scratch. But first, out of my own money, besides "The Dude," I remember going to this place and bought REM Document. I think that might have been the very first one with my own cash. Yeah.
Gosh, you're young. Chris, how about you? First record you ever bought?
The first and last record I bought as a kid, well, technically, I saved up and bought the soundtrack to Empire Strikes Back probably in like 81. Nice. But couple years later, first like pop rock record or whatever was Synchronicity, and I still own it, still have it, but it was right there like at the end of vinyl and into cassettes. So yeah, I didn't really buy any vinyl for a long time after that, but
You guys are
definitely
really
a good one.
young. That's crazy. All right, one more for you. Who's your
Yep.
guilty pleasure artist?
Oh man.
When you sing it out loud when you're in your car alone so no one else can hear you.
So this will sound very Buddhist of me. I don't want to think of these things as guilty pleasures, Tom. But at the same time, oh yeah, I will pull out Lamal, Never Ending Story, in a heartbeat. Yeah. Because I, along the way, also, full disclosure, was a theater kid, so I'll sing some musicals. That tends to throw people off. If I'm pulling something out from Anything Goes, they're like, what, why, how? Yeah.
Chris?
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't think of things as guilty pleasures too much either, but I know a lot of people dislike Phil Collins, and I get it, but I just love anything Phil Collins. So I got to, as a total like just personal thing, last year at the end of a tough year, my wife encouraged me, and I went to see Genesis in Chicago at their last tour, and it was fantastic. I just went by myself, and it was so much fun. I don't know. It's hard to qualify things as guilty pleasures really anymore. I think, especially when everything's kind of like right at your fingertips. Jason, I think you and I are similar in that way too. I think there's a handful of things we really dislike.
Oh yeah.
But there's not much that that I think that we would just like feel guilty about liking in general, or feel
If I ever decide to get off of Twitter, there's a couple of people that I will admit that I don't like, and I'll just get burned to the ground.
yeah. Every now and then it'll come up, and you're just staying for certain things. I also admire and find fascinating.
All right, here's one. I'm gonna put you both on the spot.
Okay.
Who's that one artist that everyone else in the world seems to love and think just hung the moon, and you're like, I just don't get it.
Oh, I can't say my number one because literally someone on this call will probably shoot me. Chris, you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's things that I don't know. I mean, well, yeah, there's stuff that I don't get. There's certain things that I just never, like when we were in college together, I was like never a Smashing Pumpkins fan like that much. I just never got how great they were. And it's no slight against any of that, but it just never resonated with me. There's certain artists just for whatever reason, I just can't emotionally attach myself to enough that other people seem to love. I don't know. Yeah,
I can do a safe one. All right, because I'm not scared of this fan base as much. Because if you love a lot, which I do, you probably also have a flip side, which I do. Fish. I cannot stand noodly jam stuff. I hate it with a passion. But I have two people on my staff who absolutely love Fish, and we'll jokingly fight about it all the time. But like I remember trying to convince myself that I was wrong. As a kid, I bought that cassette, Picture of Nectar, and Rolling Stone, like 5 stars or whatever. And I listened to it over and over. I'm like, what am I missing? And eventually I went, nothing. I hate this. It's okay to hate things too. But yeah, hey, look, Trey doesn't need my help. They've done
they're doing fine. When I was interning at Elektra in college, I got tickets to a Fish show, showed up late. I was there for 40 minutes. I think they were playing the same damn song. I was just like, I just can't do this. I had to go. It was too much.
You guys are killing me.
That's a good question. What show have you walked out of?
Oh boy, yeah.
No, let's not.
We don't want to end on hate,
No.
Save that for another day.
Yeah.
Jason, that's actually a perfect way to wrap this up, because it is the top of the hour. And just let me tell you both how much I have appreciated listening to you talk today. I knew this was going to be inspiring and cool and interesting, and I learned more about you. I've always held you in such high regard, and it's even higher now. And so, Chris, thank you for drawing some of that out of him.
Oh, sure.
Nashville is better for Jason being here, and I wish we had you back here, Chris. So come on down because the weather's not going to be quite as nasty here this winter as it's going to be there in Minnesota.
Yeah, I'll keep my flip-flops and shorts handy in that 100-degree weather. But yeah,
Tom,
always
thank you.
Nashville's
for
always a
letting us do
home.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Seriously,
Thank you so
really,
much for
really
this.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Amen. To the audience, thank you for your attention here. We'll be back here next Thursday at the same time with a couple more rock stars, and just be nice to each other. That's how I sign off every time. Y'all take care, folks.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah.
See ya.
Cheers.